If you caught our latest video on phishing, you know just how damaging it could be. If you didn't get a chance to watch it, you can grab the link here or in the description. Today we're going to tell you about 3 security controls that you can set up for $0 and in just a few minutes that will have a big impact on phishing in your environment. You can think of these 3 controls as the Triforce of phishing protection. Today we want to cover DKIM, SPF, and DMARC. We're going to talk you through what it is, how it works, and more importantly, how you can get it implemented today. So let's take a deeper look. Before we get into how to set up these security controls, we really should cover what they are and how they work. It'll give you a better understanding of what you're working with and how to fix anything if it goes wrong. So let's start with DKIM. DKIM is based on a cryptographic key pair, which means that you're going to have a private key and you're going to have a public key. The private key that gets generated is held onto by your email server, the one that sends your email out to the world. The public key is made available to the public via DNS, so a publicly available record. Now, anything that you encrypt with that private key can be decrypted with the public key. So when you send your email to the server is going to create 2 hashes. The first one is going to be based on the header of the email, and then the second one is going to be based on the body of the email. Those hashes are then encrypted with the DKIM private key by the server. The server then attaches the output of that to the email, and that's considered the DKIM signature. Now, that signature is an encrypted verification of the email, the header information, and its contents. So when the email is received by the destination server, it can retrieve the public key from the DNS record, and then it can decrypt the signature in order to verify the email, both with the header and with the body. When the signature is able to be decrypted and the hashes match, the email can be confirmed to come from the server that it actually said it was supposed to, and that it's associated with the domain record. And that also means that the email wasn't altered before it was received, so you can have confidence in the body of the content of the email. SPF is basically a publicly available list of servers that are approved to send email for your domain. You create this list of servers and you publish it via DNS to make it available to the world. Received emails contain a return path that provides details about the source of the email, including the IP address. The receiving server will retrieve SPF records from your domain and check that the source server in the email is on the list of approved senders. If it's not, the email can be marked as spam or phishing, and if it is, it can be allowed to pass through into your user's mailbox. DMARC actually ties DKIM and SPF together, and as such it requires both DKIM and SPF to be implemented before you implement DMARC. DKIM confirms the email was signed by a legitimate sender and that hasn't been tampered with, and SPF provides authentication that the server that sent the email was valid to do so. DMARC ties those together by doing 2 things. First, it makes sure that the domain specified on the from address of the email matches the domain from either the DKIM or the SPF record. And second, it ensures that both the SPF and DKIM validation checks pass. In the event that either of those things fail, it will tell the receiving server how to handle the email, whether to let it through, quarantine it, or outright reject it. DMARC also allows reports to be sent back to the sending server on whether or not emails checked by the policy are passing the DKIM and SPF checks. This allows you to make any changes to your DKIM and SPF records in case anything goes wrong or needs to be updated. So just a quick note before we begin walking you through the setup. We use Google Workspace and Gmail for our email services, and we use Wix for our web hosting and for managing our DNS records. So we can show you how we have things set up for the controls in our environment, but yours might differ. The concepts might be the same, but your setup might differ. Now, if you have any questions or you run into any issues, let us know in the comments and we'll do what we can to try to help. We've also added some links in the description that will explain all of the properties that you can define for DKIM, SPF, and DMARC records. And if your environment differs, you might need to alter the records using that information as a guide. So let's get started with generating the DKIM keys first. You want to start by selecting the domain we've used to generate the keys for. Then we'll click on Generate New Record, which should populate the gray text box with the information that we need. Google will provide us with the DNS hostname for our text record, which is google._domain key. It will also generate the data that goes into the DNS record. You'll notice that the data consists of multiple properties. The V is the version for DKIM of the key being used. K is the type of encryption being used for the keys. And in our case, Google chose RSA. P is the public encryption key, and it's important that you copy all of this information exactly as it is, or your DKIM key might not work. Now, generating this record won't automatically enable DKIM for your email. We still need to create the DNS record before we tell Google to start using the DKIM authentication. It can take up to 48 hours for the DNS record we'll create to populate, but we'll show you how to check if it's ready. Once the DKIM record is working, you'll need to come back to this page and click Start Authentication. Our page says Stop Authentication, but that's because we've already set this up. So next you'll need to go to where we manage our DNS records. For us, that's Wix, and the DNS record setup looks like this. So to create a new DKIM record, we want to create a new DNS record type of TXT, and we can do that by clicking on the Add Record button here. The first property in this line is the hostname value that Google provided for us. But one thing to note here is that Wix automatically adds .blueinksecurity.com to the end of whatever we put in that field. If your DNS provider doesn't do this, you'll want to append your domain name to the end of the value that Google provided. The second property is the value of the DNS record. Here we want to paste all of the properties that Google provided us with for the DKIM key, starting with the V equals all the way through the last character of the DKIM public key. Remember, this has to be the entire value or the DKIM key won't work. Once you've pasted the data, click Save. Now you have a DKIM record. It might take up to 48 hours for the DKIM record to become accessible, but we can check for that using the site dnschecker.org. This site's free, and if you look under All Tools, you'll see that it can check your SPF, DMARC, and DKIM records to ensure that they're set up and working correctly. Starting with the DKIM record, we need to provide it with the selector part of the DNS record and our domain name. In the record we created, the selector was just the first part of the hostname, which was Google, and was before the ._domain key. Next, we need to put in our domain name and click Lookup DKIM. And if the record was published and accessible, you can see the results like you can see here. You can also see an explanation of each of the attributes defined in the record, and you can see additional properties that might have default values you may want to override. So that's how you set up a DKIM key. Now, you'll want to make sure that this is set up and usable and accessible before you move on to setting up SPF and DMARC, as those will rely on the DKIM key being in place. The SPF record we set up for our environment was suggested by Google as the default value for SPF when using their email services. If you don't use Google, your SPF key might need to contain different properties. We've provided some links below that will tell you all about those different properties, but make sure to pay special attention to what's considered required, or your SPF record might not work. So to set up an SPF record, you'll need to head back to where you manage your DNS records and where you set up your DKIM record. For us, that's in Wix. So to generate an SPF record, we'll want to create a new DNS text record like we did for DKIM. But you might notice that Wix provides us with a specific place to create SPF records. We created both records just to ensure we had everything working. So let's add a new text record by clicking on Add Record. In the hostname field, if your DNS provider automatically populates your domain name like Wix does, then you can leave this field blank. If you're following other tutorials, they might tell you to place an @ sign as a placeholder for your domain. The end result is that you want the host name just to be your domain name. For us, that's just blueinksecurity.com without anything else. In the value field, you'll want to put in all of the properties that define your SPF key. In this case, we use the default values provided by Google, which includes V, the version of SPF being used, include, and then a DNS record where the list of approved sender servers can be located, and then all, which is a qualifier for the list of included servers. You can find out more information on the qualifiers in the links below, but in this case, it tells the receiving server that if the source IP address isn't in the list of approved Google servers, then it's unlikely to be legitimate and it's considered spam and it should be discarded. Now, once you've populated all of the information, you can click Save to publish your SPF record. To check if your SPF record is published and accessible, head back to dnschecker.org and All Tools and the SPF Record Checker. To verify your SPF record, type your domain into the URL field and click Validate SPF Record. If the record was accessible, you'll see the results of the SPF checks for your record as well as all of the details of the record you defined. If you scroll down, you can see that the record is expanded to include additional DNS records from Google, which define the list of approved email servers. So that's how you'd set up and check your SPF record. SPF records have a lot of options, so you may want to use the reference links below to figure out what options work best for your environment. If you have any questions, leave us a comment so we can try to help. Like SPF, DMARC has a number of properties that you can define. Now, we recommend using the documentation that we've linked below in order to determine what your DMARC record really needs to look like. But our example does cover the required properties and uses the values that we believe provide the best security. So to create a DMARC record, you'll once again want to head back to where you manage your DNS records, which for us is Wix. DMARC records are just like DKIM and SPF records in that they too are defined by DNS text records. So in that section, click on Add Record. In the hostname field, you'll want to use the standard DMARC selector value of _DMARC, followed by your hostname. Now, Wix automatically appends our hostname of bluewingsecurity.com, so we only need to populate the field with the _DMARC value. Your provider might be different, but the outcome should be that the hostname would read as _DMARC.yourdomainname.com or org or however it finishes. And the value field will define the properties of the DMARC configuration. We've populated all of the default values here, beginning with V, which is the version of DMARC being used, P, which is what the policy should do in case of the email fails an SPF or DMARC check. PCT specifies the percentage of email that the DMARC policy should apply to. You'll want to start with a low value here if you're rolling out DMARC across multiple email systems. But once it's up and running, you'll want to come back later and set that percentage to 100 so that it applies to all of the emails that are sent from your domain. The properties DKIM and SPF define how strict you want to enforce the DKIM and SPF checks. We recommend using the value of S for strict enforcement, meaning that if either of those checks fail, the email should be treated as invalid and the DMARC policy should be followed as defined in the P property, which in our case was quarantine. The RUA property allows you to define an email address that will receive DMARC reports from the servers receiving your email about whether your messages are passing or failing the DKIM and SPF checks. Since this can generate a lot of emails, we definitely recommend that you set this to a distribution list or a service account email that your administrators can check. Once you've populated all of the values, click Save to publish. And now you've got a DMARC record. To verify it's published and working, you can head back to dnschecker.org to find their DMARC validation tool. Put your domain name in the URL and then click the DMARC lookup button. If your record's published and accessible, you'll see the results of the lookup, including the record values if the test passed or failed. If you scroll further down, you can even find more information about DMARC, including examples of properties you can set. If all of your DMARC tests pass, you should have DKIM, SPF, and DMARC all set up and functioning. Now when you send your email from your domain, anyone on the receiving side can be confident that your messages are authentic and that they haven't been tampered with. This even extends to your coworkers who share your domain and you might email on a daily basis. If you're running into trouble with any of these security controls, leave us a comment below and we'll do what we can to try to help you out. Configurations can be difficult. And if you're looking for more information on other security controls you can implement to better protect yourself from phishing, check out our security controls series right here.